Hello, we are back again for another day of Advent of Code. Today, I have managed to get here on time, so that is good. And I'm just setting up uh, all the boilerplate stuff so that as soon as the challenge gets released, we're able to get going. So right now, I have set it up so that if I paste the input into this file, back in this file, I will be able to access it in the variable input, but I won't mess up my kind of file because it's not like 3,000 lines long. Depending on the challenge, right? We have 2.5 minutes to go. And I was thinking last night after I finished the last few challenges, whether or not to start abstracting out some of my code. Last year, what happened with some of the challenges is they kind of led on from each other. And so from like the day 5 challenge led on to like the day 9 challenge depended on your solution for the day 5 challenge. And so or something like that, the specific days, I can't remember. And you ended up building this, like, they called it an int code machine. It was basically an interpreter. And so the challenge inputs was actually this code that you would have to interpret and execute according to the specifications of the challenge. Now, I personally thought that was really, really fun, and I really enjoyed it, but I think a lot of people might not have, especially because if you missed a day and that day was like to add additional instructions into your encode machine, then the next time you have a challenge, if you didn't go back and do it, you would be stuck, and there would be no way for you to get a high score because you would have to re-implement another day's solution first before you can go. But yeah, in the end, that was really cool because I think the whole encode machine could like play a breakout. You could emulate like robots or drones running around your ship and things like that. So that was a really cool challenge. I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to something like that this year, and I really hope that something like that happens. But we have no idea what's going to happen yet. So it looks like we have 45 seconds to go. Today, I was thinking what I'll do today is I will speed solve the challenge first, and then once I've solved it, I will go back and explain what I did as well as I can. So we'll see how that goes. Still trying out this streaming thing. So we have 20 seconds, and yeah, see what happens. All right. Gonna calm my nerves a little bit. Okay, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we go. Now what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to open that input file first and copy it. Cool, so we're now at the airport. Well, we don't have our passport. Okay, the automatic passport scanners are slow because they have a job detecting which passports have all required fields. The expected fields are these. Passport data is validated in batch files, your puzzle input. Each passport is represented in a sequence of key value pairs, separated by spaces or new lines. Passports are separated by blank lines. Okay, so here's, okay. So this is another like one of those cases where we can cheat. How long is this file actually? It's pretty long. Okay, I guess we're not going to be able to cheat. Okay, so I'm just going to have to actually pause it this time. But there are a couple of ways we could do this. So let's just do it. Passports equals empty array for const line of input so this is all the passports. This is the current passport. If the line is empty. That means we're done with that passport. We add it dot push, we add it to the array, and we reset the passport. Otherwise, we will take that line and split it on spaces. Does it say spaces? Spaces or new lines. Are there multiple spaces? No multiple spaces. Good. Dot split on a space for const pair of split. For each pair of the split, we will have to split it again. Const key value equals pair dot split on the colon. So we add that to the thing, right? Key value 0 is the key, needs to equal the value. And that should pretty much be it, actually. At the end, we need to push the final thing because there's no new line at the end. Yeah, and this needs to continue. Cool, so I think that is it. It looks like we've basically managed to parse it already. Good, we parsed it. Nice. The second part, the first is valid, all 8 fields are present. The second is invalid. It's missing height. Third passport is only missing a field CID, so it looks like data from North Pole credentials, but not a passport at all. Surely no one would mind if you made a system temporarily ignore missing CID fields. Treat this passport as valid. The fourth passport, missing 2 fields, CID and BIR. Missing CID is fine, but missing any other field is not, so this passport is invalid. Your system would report 2 valid passports. Count the number of valid passports, those with all the required fields. Treat CID as optional. How many passports are valid? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, cool. So we're just counting the number of passports. Now I think in Node, in JavaScript, we can do this thing where we go B in A? No. Okay, so we just have to go if A, B is null. Oops. Right, okay, so const rec fields are, and we need to copy this again. Cool, but not this one, right? This is optional. So let count equals 0 for pp in, oh, I can't use pp, p in pps. I can't use pp because I already used it before. If they all, right? Is there a dot all? No, every. Yes. Okay. So rec fields dot every yep, if so that, then valid plus plus, and we print out the number of valid passports. 0. Great. What did I do wrong? Really? None of these are valid? That'd be impossible. I, B, EY, HGT, HCL, ECL, PID. So that one's valid. That's 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is valid. How can it? Oh, this is a JavaScript thing. Oh, that sucks. That wasted a lot of time. 245. Oh, 782. 785, no. I'll explain what I did wrong there, but I used in instead of of, and this is one of those JavaScript things that really annoys me, but that's okay. Okay, you can continue to ignore CID, but each other field has strict rules about what values are valid and what is not. Oh, okay, so we're doing like a validation thing. Job is account with both present and valid according to the rules above. Here are some examples. Okay, so there are a couple of ways to do this, but one way we can do this is we can, in fact, just use some functions. So it has to be at least 1920 and can't be greater than 2002. This one is, oh, I gotta pause it as well, wait. That's pretty annoying, actually. And it might not pause as an int. So that's the thing. What happens if you try to pass not an integer in JavaScript? Nan. Is nan greater than or equal to 1920? Okay. So that might just work. Parse int that and that. Yeah. Oops. At least 2010 and at most 2020. Yeah is 4 digits at least 2020 and at most 2030. All right, now I need to know another JavaScript behavior. If I parse int something that starts with a number but it finishes with something that's not a number, what happens? I get the number. Sometimes these really flexible rules is good for us. Because like, look at this one. It says height, a number followed either by CM or in. If CM, the number must be between 150. Okay, so we say, let's see. Well, we're gonna need to make this a proper function. If thing dot ends with, can you substring the end of a string? Like -2 kind of thing? Yes, you can. Yeah, JavaScript is so cool. I love it and hate it at the same time. If not substring suffix. If suffix is what's the rule? If it's CM, then return parse int. Well, since we're doing this, val equals parse int, then we don't have to keep doing it. Return val greater than or equal to 150 and val less than or equal to 193. If suffix is inch, then return val greater than or equal to 59 and val less than or equal to 76, else return false. Cool, that's that one. HCl hair color, a percentage followed by exactly 6 digits. We could do this with a regex, but I don't know how to write regexes in JavaScript. Like, does that work? Oh, it does work. Wait a second. I can just do that. And that's 6, right? Dot test. Is it test? True. That is also true because I need to do this. That should be false, and that should also be false, and that should also be false. Woo! Just doing some random guessing, and we managed to find out JavaScript syntax. That is pretty next level. Dot test. That, yes, that should be correct. ECL, eye color, exactly one of. We're gonna go exactly one of these, right? So to check exactly one of something, brown, gray, green, hazel, other, dot index of is greater than equal to 0. That should do it. And PID is a 9-digit number including leading zeros, All right, so this one we can do with a another regex, and we just say 0 to 9 repeated 9 times. Okay, so that should compile. No, it doesn't compile. It's not happy with something somewhere. Oops. Can I do this? Okay. Okay, let's see what's wrong here. Rec fields.every is not a function. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so I did actually get it right. So now we have to go okay, so we go let v equal true, then for const key in. This time we're using in, and this is what tripped me up last time. I will get back to this. And rec fields, so key. So const validate func is rec fields key if not valid func p key actually, can we pause like null? Okay, we should probably do a little bit of some other stuff here. If p key is null or not valid func p key, then v equals false, break. Then here, if everything's still true, we did it. Okay, so apparently my answer is 133. I'm just going to submit it first. We can debug it later. We got it! 219! So actually, people did that second part quite slow. All right, so we got it. And now it's time to explain what the heck I just did with all of this random stuff up here. So maybe we'll start with the first one. So the first challenge, let me go back here, because this was a really, really wordy challenge. It's basically saying we are stuck at customs, but we don't have an actual passport, but somehow we have the ability to, due to some questionable network security, we were able to do a little trickery and change the way the passports get scanned. And so what we wanted to do was make sure, we wanted to change the validation algorithm so that our what was it called? Our North Pole credentials, which didn't have a country ID, were still accepted as valid passports. And so the first part of this challenge was really to just parse this information. Now, usually when you parse information, you can parse it line by line, and they kind of threw a little curveball in here, just to make it so that you had to be able to parse both new lines and spaces as different fields, and that you had to take an entire blank line as an indication of the start of a new passport. So every group of these data, let's say, is one passport, is what the question said. And so to parse this, what we need to do is we need to keep parsing lines until we come and add all of those fields into some sort of way of storing it, of keeping track of it. And then when we come across a new line, a blank line, which in this case is just a line with a completely empty string, that's when we say, okay, that previous passport was finished, we have entered all the information for it into it already, and you can just save it somewhere. And so that's the general algorithm of what I did, which was this whole thing up here. So let me rename some of these variables so that it's a bit easier to read. Now, I have this habit of when I do these challenges that I just use really short variables because it's less typing, which means I can do it faster. But that is not good programming practice, and you should not do it for work. So the first thing is I have this array called passports. Now, I used let here. Technically, this will still work if I use const because of the way const and let work in JavaScript. But this is kind of one of those really debatable things, and I think different companies or different groups, teams will have different style guides on how to do this sort of thing. But in my case, yeah, I usually actually use const instead of let in this case. But we'll use let because, actually no, you know what, we'll use const because it makes a bit more sense. I'm just gonna, yeah, set it up to run again to make sure it still runs. And so I have an array of passports. This is the array where I'm going to store all of the information in the input after it's been turned into a JavaScript object, which I can access all the stuff with. Now, PP was a passport. Now, this one does have to be let because further down here, you'll see that I reset it. And we'll get into why we reset that later. But if I was doing this properly, I might call this current passport. That will make it a bit easier to understand what's going on. I'm just going to go replace all of these. Cool. So now that I have these two variables, I have this current passport object, which is where I'm going to add all the fields as I parse them. And then I also have this passports, which is once I hit that blank line and I know I've finished with a passport, I'm going to take that passport object, add it to this passports array, and then create a new object to put into this, to reset this current passport to a new object so I can start parsing the next passport. And so here, for const line of input, this is basically saying loop through this input array and assign each line one at a time to this line variable. And so the first time I go through this loop, line will be the first line. The second time I go through the loop, it'll be the second line. The third time I go through the loop, it'll be third time, and so on. And I start with, we'll come back to this bit because this is that final step, right, of what happens when you hit a blank line. If line equals blank, so this is that final step. But it has to come up front when you're parsing this thing for logic reasons. It just has to. But what's more interesting is how do we parse those fields? And string parsing is one of those things that you do a lot of, especially if you learn programming yourself. You would have done this sort of thing so many times. Usually when you in a work environment, you would have structured data, not string data, and you wouldn't really come across this sort of problem because this having data as strings is usually considered pretty bad practice. But in this case, we need it. So what I'm saying, this const split equals line.split. So line.split is saying take the line that you're currently reading and split it on the space, on every space. And so what would happen is, let's say I take this line, for example. What would happen is that split would now be an array that looks like this. Split on every space. So now it's an array that is that is a length 4 array. So that's what would have happened. That's what happens after you run this line. So now that split is like this, what I'm saying is, okay, I called this a pair, you could call it whatever. I'm saying now for each of these pairs, I want you to split it again, but this time split on the colon. And so KV, in this case, let's say we take the first one, now it looks like this. And so you can see KV0 is going to be the key, and KV1 is going to be the value. And that's what I do. I take the current passport, which is a JavaScript object. So you can see up here, it's a JavaScript object. And I'm adding to this object that value and that key. So after running this once, current passport would look like this. And this is a string, not an integer. When I run this the second time, we're going to get ECL and A and B in here instead. But critically, you'll notice that current passport hasn't changed. It's still the same object. And so what ends up happening is that it gets added to the same object like this. And that's how we're parsing this string information and converting it into a JavaScript object. So that's that. Now, so that's all good, right? It will keep adding to the same passport. But we don't want it to keep adding the same passport because we're trying to parse all the passports into separate objects. So how do we know when we've reached the end, when we've finished one passport? We know when we've reached the blank line. And so once we've reached the blank line, we do this. We push, which is a JavaScript function that says add. Basically, we add the current passport to the array of passports that we've been collecting, that we will be storing all the passports in. And then we reset current passport to a new object. And what this means is that so then now we have the old object completely parsed in the passports array, and we have a new one ready for the next bit of information. This continue here is a keyword that says stop looping, don't carry on, but go back and start the next line immediately. And so we don't accidentally try to parse this blank line. That's what that does. Cool. And then right at the end, because I noticed at the end of our input, we don't have a blank line, which means the last passport is still sitting in the current passport object, but it's not in the passports array, and that's why we had to push it in. So there was that. Now with the with the next bit, now this is a bit of a mess. So that's how we did that first bit. Oh right, and I did something a little bit interesting here, right? Because that added all the passports into the passports array, but we had to do a little bit more to get a solution, right? The question asked, how many passports in my list have all of these fields except for CID? And so the way I did that was I said, first, I'm gonna create an array of all the required fields that we want. Oh, this is going to take a while. Let's do it like this. Okay, there we go. So now rec fields is an array containing all the fields that we want to make sure it has. Now JavaScript arrays have this function called every. And it basically says, take every item in this array can run a true or false function against it, and if it's true for every element in the array, then return true. If it's false for even just one element in the array, then it returns false. So here's an example of how this works. So if I have an array of 1, 2, and let's say 4, that's A. If I say A.every, for every number n in this list, if n is less than 5, is every number less than 5? That's a better question. Is every number n less than 5? If it is, it returns true, it does. Now if I ask the same question, is every number less than 3? 4 isn't less than 3, so you can see it returns false. So what I ended up doing was I ran that same function here, and I said, take my passports and check. Oh no, that's not what I did, eh? Because this is for every passport, and so I had a counter, a valid count, a 0, and I said, for every passport in passports, of passports. And yeah, that in and of tripped me up. We'll come to what the difference between that is in the next thing. For every passport of passports does for every field in rec fields. So this is field F. Does passport contain that field? And the one way you can check if it contains that field is you ask if it equals null. If you know that every field is not supposed to be null, you can check for null. So this will say, this statement right here will say that if for every field in here, if the current passport has every single field, right? If all of these fields are not empty, are not null, then only then will this expression return true. So I'm saying if this statement is true, if in fact every single one of these fields is in this current passport we're looking at, then it's valid, and we want to increase the number of valid passports we have. And so that's how we got that number of 245. I'll call it part 1. Is valid. So that was quite straightforward. But the second, and that's how we got the answer to the first one, but the second half was a little bit more tricky. It said, now we don't want to just check that the values are there. We want to check more. We want to check that the values are there and they satisfy these additional requirements. And so there are a lot of different ways you could do this. You could split this into individual functions if you wanted to. But because I was quite used to functional programming, and I know that a lot of what I've written is very, very poor and not functional programming, but I still think in a functional programming way, even if I don't write it out. This is one of those cases of do as I say, not as I do. So I'm going to change this. This is called rec funcs. Cool. Okay. So now instead of having an array of all the fields that I need, I've changed this into an object where the key is the field, but the value of the object is a function that will help me validate that field. Now I could write these out in a little bit better because this is written really poorly. A couple of things. I started with Scala when I first started working, and in Scala, underscore was a I think it was an unused argument in a lambda in one of these function expressions, and I just really liked it. You could put x, you could put whatever in here. It's a variable name, but I liked underscore, and I ended up using it a lot. But it does get confusing, and I appreciate that. But yeah, so here we go. Birth year, the requirements for it was that it's 4 digits, it's at least 1920, at most 2002. If you remember from what I wrote earlier, the values, they were all still strings. I didn't do any sort of parsing. And in JavaScript, you can't compare a string to a number. I don't think it does that conversion automatically. I think PHP does, but I'm fairly sure JavaScript doesn't. And so I have to change it into a number. And in JavaScript, the way to change a string into a number is to run the parseInt function. You pass it the string, and you tell it to convert it into base 10 numbers. And that's what that 10 is. Now here it's a little inefficient because I'm parsing that int twice because this is a single statement. Usually what you would do is you would parse it. Usually what you do is when you parse the whole thing, you would have already converted it to a number. But I was doing this in a hurry, so I didn't. So I'm saying that, okay, check that the birth year as a number is greater than or equal to 1920 and that it is less than or equal to 2000. That's all that's saying. So this is a function that will do that. And then you go through and you do all the other validations, right? These two are the same thing, just with different numbers. The height was an interesting one. So the requirement said it has to end in cm or in for centimeters or inches, presumably. In JavaScript, you can substring off the end of a string by using negative numbers. And I remember checking that in Node. So that's another thing. When it comes to these programming challenges, keep a window open with an interpreter, because you can, if you're not sure whether something works, just chuck it in there, see that it works, and then you can use it in your program straight away. And so yeah, the suffix is going to be the last two characters of that string. It might be cm. I'm going to guess that like there are ones that don't end with cm or in. Yeah, like this one ends with 42, which is not what we want. And then the value is just parsing, the rest of the string. And I remember checking this as well. It turns out JavaScript lops off any trailing non-numeric digits when you parse it, so I didn't have to do any extra parsing there. I missed a semicolon here. JavaScript is very lenient on that sort of thing, so it didn't crash or anything. But yeah, put your semicolons on. It's good. And so yeah, this is literally translating the statement in the problem challenge into code, right? If the suffix is centimeters, the number must be at least 150 and at most 193. If the suffix is centimeters in my code, then check that the value is greater than or equal to 150 and that it's less than 193. And same thing for inches, and if it doesn't, and if the suffix is not cm and it's not inch, then return false. And so that's the function for checking height. Now this, again, regex. So this is regex to the rescue. This is one of those cases where regex probably does make sense to check. If you've never read regexes before, this looks like a mess of symbols and numbers, but it's actually very, it has very precise meaning. So regexes start and end with a slash in JavaScript. That's just what that's just part of the way it looks. The first thing is this caret. This caret means match the start of a string. Yeah, so this is saying start matching at position 0. Oh, I didn't explain what regexes do. Regexes is a way to match strings according to a pattern or a template. And so what this bunch of letters and symbols here are doing is describing what that set of what that template is. We start with a caret which says start at position 0, start at the start of the string. Now the backslash is an escape for the hash. I'm actually not sure if you need it for the hash. Maybe you don't need it for the hash, actually. Maybe you don't need it. You probably don't need it, actually. So now we match the literal character hash. And then here, what this next bit is saying is it's saying match any of the following letters or numbers. Any number from 0 to 9 or any letter from A to F. And we want to match that 6 times. Once we've matched it 6 times, make sure we're now at the end of the string. And then the dot test is saying return true or false whether or not the string we pass in matches this template. And that's what that does. So this was translating the specification in the puzzle into a regex that would work. So that's that. So down here it's the same, it's a regex. This time you might be able to use like compare to the previous one and understand what this one is doing. Start at the start of the string, match any of the digits from 0 to 9, match it 9 times, and make sure we're at the end of the string. Cool. And the last one was this iColor, which said it had to be one of the following. One way to check for if it was one of the following is you chuck it all into an array. You ask JavaScript, does the string I want what is the index of the string I want in this array? And if it's in there, it will give you the index starting from 0. If it's not, it will give you -1 or null or something like that. Something that is non-numeric. Something that is not from 0 to the length of the list. And so I just said, yeah, just check that the value in iColor is in this array. Basically, that's what that says. And so yeah, so we had this object of the field to a function that will return true if the value of that field is valid. And so the last little bit that we did was the same thing. So we reset valid count to 0, const p of passports. Oh yeah, I also did Go for a while. And in Go, it's encouraged to use single letter variable names in loops, as far as I know. I hope that hasn't changed. If it has, I'm horribly behind times. But yeah, so I got used to using this kind of const p of passports. And this is, again, another procedural way to check this sort of thing. We start with a temporary variable, v, set it to true. And what this thing does is, I'm going to explain it in a bit, but it's basically saying if any of the fields in this passport doesn't match the validate function that we had written earlier, then set v to false, and stop looping. Break is like continue, but it's different. Break is like continue takes you back to here and runs the next one. Break stops looping and takes you right to the end. And then at the end, once we've checked every validate function, if all the validate functions validated, then v would never be set to false. So v would still be true here, and if v is still true, we have a valid passport and we increase that value of valid count. Now this loop here is one that does all the heavy lifting. Now this time you see we use const key in recfuncs and not const key of. So this was what tripped me up before. In JavaScript there are two ways to write this sort of loop. You can go const of, you can go variable of a list, or you can go variable in a list. If you use of, you get the actual value in the list or in the list. But if you use in, you get the key or the index. And so before, when I used const p of passport, const p in passports, I was actually getting 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 all the way to the length instead of the actual object. So that's why my program wasn't working. So in this case, const key in recfuncs, key is now going to be one of these values like birth year, issue year, expiry year, height, and so on. And valid func is recfuncs that key. So valid func is the function associated with that particular value. So if it was expiry year, then valid func would be this function here. And so this is just the check. If in my passport that key exists, right? If in the passport the key doesn't exist, or if the validate function returns false, then this passport has an invalid field and we want to set it to false. So set v to false, which means that this is not a valid passport. It breaks, skips to the end, it says, nope, this is not a valid passport, I'm going to check the next passport. And that's pretty much it. And that's how you can get your answers at the end. Which was a little anticlimactic. I always say that word wrong. And it seems like the second part did actually take people a lot longer, because if we go back to the stats, yeah, my personal stats. Give me my personal stats, please. Yeah, 700, but only about 200 for the second half. So yeah, that was pretty good. Anyway, that was a really long explanation. I'm still learning how to do this thing well. We'll probably have to cut it back next week on how I explain things. So I'll see you again tomorrow, hopefully. So take